Moving over here a little bit, we talked a little earlier, I've heard each of you, I think, mention lotting plans. Lotting plans are something that originated in the 1700s as the settlement of New Hampshire was coming in. Basically, the process came down to this. The land was either owned by the colony, that is, it was the king's land, and owned by the king and run by the king's governor, or it was owned under the claim of John Mason, that he supposedly purchased from a royal claim in the 1620s and 1630s. And basically, if you look at a map of New Hampshire, not particularly this one, but this one will do, you will see town lines that form an arc approximately through this area. And the town lines that form this arc now are following what is known as the Smithsonian Curve. And that curve was surveyed in 1758. And it was trying to mark on the ground that line that was 60 miles from the ocean. 60 miles from the ocean. And all of what was claimed, what was within that, between the ocean and that curved line, was what was claimed under John Mason's claim. A claim that was purchased in 1741 by 13 wealthy merchants in Portsmouth, who are known as the Smithsonian proprietors. That is, the proprietors under the Smithsonian claim. A lot of towns had already been granted in that same area by that point. And they simply said, all right, we recognize those claims. That's fine. But anything that hasn't been granted belongs to us, and we will do the granting. And so groups of individuals, groups ranging maybe from 60 people to 100 people, 120 people, would get together and they would send a petition to these individuals, the proprietors, and say, would you give us some land? And the Masonian proprietors would say, yes, we'll give you some land. We'll give you a tract of land that is 6 miles by 6 miles in a particular area. Go out, hire a surveyor to mark it on the ground, and then come back to us with that description, and we will give it to you. And it was an outright gift with certain exceptions, reservations. Number one, you're going to settle a certain number of settlers on that 6 mile by 6 mile tract of land within a certain number of years. About 5 years, you'll have a certain population already living there. They will have houses of a certain dimension. Those houses will have a central chimney. They will have cleared X number of fields of pasture and X number of acres of garden. You will have built a townhouse. You will have hired a minister to preach at that townhouse. You will have laid out X number of rods of roads within that town. Oh, and by the way, we, the Smithsonian proprietors, reserve to ourselves one fraction of the land that we're giving to you. In other words, if there are 120 of you and there are 13 of us, we are reserving to us 1/133rd of the land in the township. You guys invest your sweat equity, clearing the land, building a town, building a sawmill, setting up a store, having all of the amenities of a civilization carved out of the wilderness. And then we will take our pieces and sell them as being pretty valuable pieces of lots of land in an already settled town. So in other words, this wilderness is worth next to nothing to us. An acre of that is worth next to nothing. So we'll give you 90% of it, 95% of it. But the 5% we reserve to ourselves rises so significantly in value by your labor that we will make a profit on our purchase price. So that's how the system worked. And it was considered by most people to be a pretty good deal. I have no money to buy land, but if I take my family out and we settle this, we get the land free. We get a farm. And in the meantime, of course, these wealthy investors were saying, and we make a profit. So I don't know that it would fly now, but at the time, it was actually, I think, thought to be a pretty good deal. So what would happen is the Masonian proprietors would grant a tract of land, and it had been surveyed, the boundary lines had been surveyed by the surveyor, 6 miles by 6 miles. Then the question becomes is, how do the proprietors, the town proprietors, the grantees, then divide that 6 miles by 6 miles and come up with individual farms? And what they typically did was they divided by having the surveyor run long lines across the town at certain set intervals, generally 160 rods. And mark those out, and those are range lines. And that would be a range of lots. Boom, boom. And those ranges would then be divided into parcels of land at a certain acreage. If you wanted a 100-acre parcel, you would measure 100 rods along that line. That's why you did the 160 rods having parallel lines. Because you could say, if you want 100 acres, you measure 100 rods and measure a corner. Another 100 rods, measure a corner. 100 rods, measure mark a corner. If you want 80-acre parcels, measure 80 rods, 80 rods, 80 rods, because the mathematics worked out that would give you an easy way of setting how large a parcel you can make. And so typically you find lots in the 100 plus or minus 20 acres range. 80 acres to 120 acres is typical.
This plan looks like all the lots are approximately the same size. I know in Plymouth, the land was granted in 100 acres of upland and 20 acres of interval land.
And there were different strategies.
I'm not seeing that along the river here. Is that typical, or?
There were several different strategies. I think that there are three sort of general practices, and one is what was followed in Plymouth. And it followed generally that type of lotting. That is, you would have relatively small lots along the river, trying to form a nucleus settlement to sort of make it easier to protect yourselves from Native American tax or whatever. And then you'd go out into the larger tracts of land. So you would have a house lot, a larger garden lot, and then a fairly good-sized wood lot that you could have. That was one strategy. Another is a strategy very similar to this, where what they did was that apparently it looks to me like maybe they laid out this little area in here to start out with, and then they laid out most of the rest. They ended up with some gores that they then added on later and sort of divided in sort of their own sort of way, separate ways. So in this particular case, it looks to me like there might be 3 different times when they divided the land up. These, and then these, and then I don't know what this is, but this is probably lots and ranges from another town that were annexed to this particular town. This is Chichester, I think. So this may have been a part of Canterbury or Loudon or whatever that eventually got annexed to Chichester to become part of Chichester. But then the third way is that I see quite often is that they simply, there's a surveyor, I know his name is clear as mud. It's right on the tip of my tongue. He surveyed, Henniker, for example, surveyed the outside just the way Bob Woodard surveyed the outside of the block. And then at certain intervals, 160 rod intervals, he marked the ranges. And then when he went across the north line of the parcel, he was marking 100 rod distances. And then what he did was he would run across a range line marking 100 rod distances, but wouldn't bother to do the lot line that connected between 100 rod line on the 100 rods on the north line and 100 rods on the range line. That was, he left to the individual owners to figure out where that line was. But he just simply marked every 100 rods and went up and down these range lines, marking off his 100-acre lots. And it was done all at one time. And then they would put into a hat range 1 lot 1, range 2 lot 1, range 3 lot 1, and so on. And they would pick it out and say, oh, I got range 3, lot number 7. Where is that? Oh, right in the middle of a swamp. Oh, can I give this back? I want to draw again, you know? And sometimes the proprietor as a group would say, yeah, you can do that. And sometimes they say, no, you got it. You know, make a grist mill out of the swamp or something, flood the swamp, and, or whatever. But that's sort of how they work. And as we saw on the aerial photographs, you can often see the evidence of these ancient division lines. Now, this is not an original lotting plan. There are very few original lotting plans left that I know of. But what there are for nearly every town are reproductions, or reproductions of reproductions, or reproductions of reproductions of reproductions of reproductions. And the Land Surveyors Association has put together a catalog of lotting plans that don't try to be exhaustive, but try to give you a sense of places that you can find a copy of the lotting plan for any particular town. Whether it's a published town history, whether it's a published state papers, whether it's the state archives, the Orrin James collection has a lot of lotting plans, or other sources that the surveyors have run across that have lotting plans. Registries of deeds have some. So you can sort of get a sense of where can I find lotting plans. They're not all going to be alike. You may want to compare them because errors may have crept into them because there are multiple generations of these things. But typically it gives you an idea, and when you look at a USGS map or an aerial photograph map or blister rust map, you can frequently begin to see the patterns, especially if you know what the pattern was in a particular area.